The moving truck's brakes screeched, echoing through the peaceful neighborhood. Birds fluttered away from the tall pine trees as a silver pickup pulled behind it. James stepped out, his eyes fixed on the rustic log cabin that sat proudly at the end of the lane. For years, he had dreamed of owning a retreat far from the noise of the city. Finally, this was his fresh start. But even before he could take a deep breath of the mountain air, whispers began to stir around him. Curtains shifted in nearby homes, and pairs of watchful eyes followed his every move. James smiled politely, unloading boxes from his truck, but deep down he felt the tension. Something about the way the neighbors looked at him was not welcoming, it was defensive. As if they were guarding a secret. Then, as he carried the first box toward the porch, a woman in a pressed navy dress marched up the gravel path. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the silence. "Excuse me, sir, but what exactly do you think you're doing here?" He paused, confused by her tone. "I'm moving in. This cabin is mine now." Her lips curled into a scowl. "This cabin belongs to our HOA's jurisdiction. You can't just walk in here without permission. You'll have to leave immediately." The calmness James had carried with him began to slip. He had signed the papers, paid every cent, and done everything legally. Yet here he was, facing hostility before even setting foot inside his home. What he didn't know was that this confrontation was just the beginning of a storm that would turn his dream into a community-wide spectacle. James had dealt with difficult people before, but this was different. The woman, who introduced herself as Karen, claimed to be the HOA president. She didn't smile once. Instead, she handed him a packet filled with rules, fees, and threats disguised as community guidelines. James flipped through it, each page heavier than the last. No wood-burning stoves, no exterior changes without approval, mandatory landscaping by HOA vendors only. He set the packet down. "With respect, I own this cabin. It's not part of your HOA." Karen's eyes narrowed. "Oh, it's part of our neighborhood, all right. And we don't allow outsiders who don't follow the rules." She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "If you don't comply, we'll make sure you regret stepping foot here." That night, James sat by the fire inside his cabin. Shadows flickered across the walls, the air heavy with uncertainty. He had fought long and hard to secure this place, and now a group of strangers was trying to strip it from him. His phone buzzed with messages from the realtor confirming again that the property was free of HOA obligations, but the warning in Karen's voice lingered. The words weren't just about rules. They carried something else, an unspoken threat that the fight ahead would not be simple. The next morning, James returned outside to unload the rest of his belongings. As soon as he stepped onto the porch, 3 more neighbors appeared alongside Karen. They weren't carrying welcome baskets or friendly smiles, just clipboards and stern expressions. "You need to stop unloading right now," one of them barked. "We've already contacted the HOA board." James steadied his voice. "I have every legal right to be here. You cannot stop me from moving into my own home." Karen's face flushed with anger. "We'll see about that." With a dramatic flourish, she pulled out her phone and dialed 911 right in front of him. "Yes, officer? We have a trespasser refusing to leave private property," she said loudly, glaring at James. James froze. His heart raced, but not from fear of being arrested. He knew he was innocent. What shook him was the sheer boldness of the accusation. Neighbors who had barely met him were ready to brand him as a criminal. The silence of the woods seemed to grow heavier, as if nature itself was holding its breath. He didn't know how the police would respond, but one thing was certain: this was no longer just about a cabin. It was about dignity, truth, and a man refusing to be bullied. 15 minutes later, flashing blue lights cut through the tall trees, painting streaks across the cabin's wooden walls. 2 officers stepped out of the squad car, their boots crunching against the gravel driveway. Karen hurried toward them, gesturing dramatically. "Officers, thank goodness you're here. This man broke into my property. He refuses to leave. Arrest him." James stood still, his shoulders square. He greeted the officers with calm respect. "Good morning. I believe there's been a misunderstanding. I am the rightful owner of this cabin. I have all the documents to prove it." The younger officer raised an eyebrow. "Sir, do you have those documents on hand?" James nodded and walked to his truck, pulling out a neat folder. He handed over the signed deed, payment records, and a legal letter confirming the cabin's exemption from HOA control. The officers studied the papers carefully. The silence was broken only by Karen's impatient foot tapping. Finally, the older officer looked up and shook his head. "Ma'am, everything here checks out. This man owns the property fair and square. You had no right to call this in as trespassing." Karen's face drained of color, her jaw opening but no words coming out. The neighbors behind her shifted uncomfortably, realizing the tide had turned. What happened next stunned everyone. Instead of confronting James, the officers turned to him with warm smiles. "Sir, welcome to your new home," the older officer said, extending his hand. "We actually grew up near this area. This cabin has a history, it was once a ranger's lodge. You've chosen well." James shook his hand, relief flooding his chest. The younger officer added, "If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to call. And don't worry about HOA trouble, they have no legal authority here." The shift in the air was palpable. The hostility that had filled the driveway moments ago evaporated, replaced by a sense of justice. Karen, however, stood frozen, her authority stripped away in front of her own neighbors. The officer's kindness wasn't just about the law, it was a statement. James wasn't an intruder. He was part of this land's story now. That night, James lit a fire on the porch. For the first time, he felt peace settle in his heart. The battle wasn't over, he knew Karen wouldn't let go so easily, but he had won the first round. And the greatest weapon on his side was truth. The news spread quickly through the community. Some neighbors quietly approached James, apologizing for their silence during the confrontation. They admitted they had been intimidated by Karen and her iron-fisted rule over the HOA. "You stood up when none of us could," one elderly neighbor whispered. "Maybe things will change now." James nodded, but he also understood the weight of responsibility. By choosing not to bow down, he had unknowingly become a symbol of resistance against unfair control. Karen, meanwhile, tried to save face. She called an emergency HOA meeting, ranting about protecting the neighborhood and keeping outsiders out. But the truth was clear, her power had cracks. And James had driven the first wedge. As days turned into weeks, James continued settling into the cabin, working on small repairs, planting flowers, and making the place feel like home. Each evening, he would see neighbors passing by, their eyes no longer cold, but curious, even hopeful. The cabin wasn't just a retreat anymore. It was a beacon. Months later, Karen tried one last desperate move. She filed a lawsuit, claiming James' ownership was invalid. But when the case reached the courtroom, the judge needed only 10 minutes to dismiss it. The property stands outside HOA jurisdiction. Case closed. James walked out of the courthouse, sunlight warming his face. The battle had been long, but he had never once compromised his truth. And now, standing stronger than ever, he realized something important. This wasn't just about a cabin. It was about resilience. About showing that when you stand firm, no one can take away what's rightfully yours. Back at the cabin, neighbors gathered for a small cookout. Laughter filled the air. Children ran freely, and the oppressive shadow of the HOA finally lifted. Karen's house remained dark, her presence fading into silence. As the fire crackled under the starlit sky, James finally whispered to himself, "Home." And that was the final twist in this unbelievable HOA story. If you loved the drama, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment sharing your thoughts. It really helps this channel grow.